If somebody's has an unhealthy mind and they're thinking negatively, they're thinking poorly, they're always stressed out, what do you think is typically going on?
Oh, well, going on in what respect? I mean, emotionally, they're miserable. The more interesting part may be that they're doing great damage, I believe, to their health. I've been writing about mind body unity, which people believe there is a mind and a body. And the problem with that is how do you get from this fuzzy thing called a thought to something material called the body? So when you talk about mind body connection, it's the same thing. Anyway, I've been researching mind body unity. It's one thing. Wherever you put the mind, you're necessarily putting the body. So you can imagine all of those negative thoughts, all of those fears are taking its toll on you. In the book, The Mindful Body, I have many experiments that I think support the idea that it's a single unit. People might be aware of the first in this series, which was the counterclockwise study. We took elderly men to a timeless retreat, turned back the clock 20 years, and had them live there as if they were their younger selves. As a result, their vision improved, their hearing, their memory, their strength, and they looked noticeably younger. Many, many studies supporting this idea. Almost everything that I report in that book is based on hard data, but I don't have data for what I'm going to say yet next, but I believe it as much as one can without being totally certain, which is stress is the major killer. Now, I was going to do this work back in China before COVID, and it never ended up happening, which was to take lots of people, hundreds of people who had just been diagnosed with cancer. Nobody, when they're first told they have cancer, is going to be happy. Everybody's going to be stressed. But then let's give them 3 4 weeks, 3 weeks to live with it for a while. Now, my belief is that if we measured their level of stress every 4 weeks, that stress would indicate the course of the disease over and above genetics, nutrition, and even treatment. So that's how important I think stress is. And stress is psychological. Events don't cause stress. What causes stress are the views we take of the event. If we open up our minds and see that this thing, may have actually some advantages to it, it tends to mitigate stress response. It's also the case. I have a few one liners, so if people haven't understood anything I've said, they can still hold on to these few things. The first is most of the things we're stressed about never happen. If you review the last few times you were stressed and ask yourself, did they happen? You'll probably find no, they never did. And if they did happen, now that you're here to think about potential new stressors, somehow you got through it. Another is no worry before it's time. The first was original for me. The second, not so, but it's out there. The idea that all that worrying is not helping you to eventually deal with whatever ends up happening. When right before we got online now, and I was thinking about the adversity, which obviously you've thought about for a longer period of time. And I think, well, maybe some people, see me as living in my ivory tower. What do I know about adversity? So let me set the record straight right at the start. All right. I was divorced before most people were married when I was obscenely young. My mother died when she was 57, so I too was extremely young. And then I had a major fire that destroyed about 80% of what I owned. And so I've been through things. To hold on to them, I think, is counterproductive. But let me just tell you about the major fire. I get home from eating out, eating at a friend's house, and the fire trucks and everything are in front of my townhouse. And my friends were all outside, all the people who lived there were outside, so I wouldn't have to come up to home to this alone. I stayed at somebody's house that night because my house no longer existed. It was the first nice thing was this was winter, it was Christmas, right around Christmas. Everybody is standing outside, so I wouldn't have to face this alone. That's really nice. The next day, I called the insurance agency. When he showed up at the house, or what was left of the house, he said, this was the first time, I'm not bragging about this, it might sound that way. This was the first time that the damage was worse than the call. That means, that everybody, oh my gosh, and they get there and it's not so bad. Here was, I wasn't crazed, and yet the damage was severe. But my view was that I had already lost whatever I lost, and that getting myself crazy over it was not going to bring back the lost items or help me in any way. So the moral of that part of the story is that we have more control over our emotional responses than most of us believe. And that if we just took a breath and looked at the situation, again, what I said before, did it actually happen? Did anything happen? In this case, is my worry, stress going to bring back any of the lost items? But let me race to the end of the story because it's really a very beautiful story. It started in a adverse, tragic way. So I moved to the Charles Hotel with my dogs because I had no place else to stay. And it was Christmas Eve. I went out. I came back, and the room was full of gifts, not from the management of the hotel, not from the owner of the hotel, but from the so called little people, the people who park my car, the chambermaids, the waiters. I can't tell you, Doug, how long it took me to be able to tell this story without it bringing tears to my eyes. And every Christmas, I'm reminded of this. I did lose only one thing. That was another thing. I said, you know, any of the things that I lost really important. There was only one thing that was. I was going to be teaching a course, a large lecture class, in 3 weeks, and my notes were up in smoke, and that was an oh my goodness. But what I did, I thought was very clever. So now I'm bragging. I called an A student who took the course the year before. I borrowed her notes and used them as a frame to help me move forward with the class. And it turned out, I think that it was the best class I ever taught because I couldn't rely on everything that I had learned in the past. It was all right now new and felt meaningful.
It's a great segue into what I wanted to talk about next. And I think that's amazing, like how you turn such a hard time in your life into something meaningful and you're able to come out on the other side of it and kind of see the silver lining. I think a lot of times people get stressed when a moment arises, like you just mentioned, right? When adversity strikes. But I think collectively, a lot of people are just stressed right now. Like their stress levels are super elevated.
Especially if they're listening to the news.
Yeah, why are people so stressed right now? What can people do?
Well, the first thing they're stressed because they don't know what's going to happen and they imagine the worst. And what people don't realize is that we never knew what was going to happen. Uncertainty is the rule, it's not the exception. And if we recognize that all we have is this moment, if we deal with this moment, then the next moment, life will unfold in a reasonably calm way. I don't think that the worrying is helping anybody. Now, I think you have two choices. One is to take some action, whatever that may be. So you're doing something and now you don't feel helpless. And that also leads you to think it's less likely to happen or be terrible. The other is just to get on with things. It's interesting. If you want to not be stressed, stress requires two things. It requires a belief that something's going to happen. And second, that when it happens, it's going to be awful. And so, as an exercise with any of these things people are stressed with, first, give yourself reasons why it might not happen. And as soon as you do that, you went from, oh my God, it's definitely going to happen to it might not happen. You'll start to feel a little better. Then, this is the harder part, is to say to yourself, how might it actually be a good thing? Most, events are neither good nor bad. It's our minds that make them so. And so, if you can find a way that this thing might have some advantage to it, that'll also lead you to relax some. But yes, and there's also we can call it a stress contagion. You can't go to a dinner party. I can't go to a dinner party where the conversation doesn't become doom and gloom. I think another thing is just to avoid these gatherings or play party games. So I'm not belittling. Right now, times are stressful, but one could have always taken whatever they were experiencing and imagine things changing for the worst to get themselves stressed. So, people don't realize that all emotions are really choices. I might say, you made me so angry. Or I'm so scared because of this event. But it's not you that's making me angry. It's my looking at what you've said or done in such a way that leads me to feel anger. Rather than realize whatever you did, you probably did because of you having nothing to do with me.
I know stress is chronic stress, I should say, has been called like the silent killer, right? Because of the impact that it can have on you. And and I know in the last few years there's been clarification in the sense that some stress is actually like good. And if you weren't
I disagree with that. Yeah, I mean, it comes up all the time, and I have a lot of respect for some of the people who are doing this work. I think that some people believe that a little stress, right before you're going to run a race or take an exam, it might be good to get yourself a little crazed so the adrenaline is flowing in. You'll run faster or be able to access more answers to the questions to be asked. I think there are other ways of getting ourselves, excited and happy. That, I mean, let's say you and I, this would be an absurd thing, but that's the way I'm feeling right now. So we're going to go out on a blind date. Now, so I'm waiting for you to come to the, I'm too old for you. I mean, we have so many reasons that this would not be the right thing, but just to make the point. Okay, so I'm waiting for you to come pick me up, and I now am feeling agitated. Okay, I can call what I'm feeling anxiety, stress, or I can just as easily label it excitement. If I see myself as excited about you coming to pick me up, you can imagine how nice the opening part of our new relationship would be. Whereas if I'm anxious, when you first come in the door, I'm probably going to be angry at you. Okay, so what I'm saying is the same physiological response can be understood in very different ways, and that's a choice. Now, when we're mindless, people have no choices. And my research over 45 years has taught me that virtually all of us are mindless almost all the time. The thing, Doug, is that when you're mindless, you're not there to know you're not there. Right? So we're oblivious to how mindless we are. But every time we think we know, all of the certainties we expect, we expected 2 years ago, no, it's before COVID, 5 years ago, we'll say, that everything is going to unfold peacefully and nicely for us. One can never know what's going to happen. Uncertainty is the rule, not the exception. But when we think we know, we don't pay any attention. Let me make this a little simpler. When you're mindless, you're like a robot. And if you ask yourself, do robots have choices? No. Do robots have positive emotions? No. And when people hear me talk about mindfulness, they too often, or not too often, but they often think of meditation. Mindfulness, as I study it, has nothing to do with meditation. Meditation is fine, it's just something that's different. Meditation is a practice you engage in to result in post meditative mindfulness. Mindfulness, as I study it, is more immediate. And you can get there top down or bottom up. So, top down, if you really recognize that you don't know anything. Most of what people think they know comes from science. Science can only give us probabilities, it doesn't give us absolute facts. Right. So if you ask yourself how you might be wrong about whatever it is you're experiencing, or everything that I've said on podcast after podcast, I'm getting tired of hearing myself say it. But I ask people how much is 1 plus 1, because this is the thing that people think they know best. Everybody knows it's two, but it's not always two. If you were to add 1 watt of chewing gum plus 1 watt of chewing gum, 1 plus 1 is 1. You add 1 pile of laundry plus 1 pile of laundry, 1 plus 1 is 1. Now, the point of it is that when you know 1 plus 1 can be 1, 1 plus 1 can be 2, you have a choice. When you have a choice, you pay attention to the context to decide how you're going to respond. When you just thought mindlessly, as we do with all of the facts we've processed mindlessly, that somebody says 1 plus 1, you mindlessly answer 2. So we have choices that we're not taking advantage of. We're being moved about in this world. People are pressing our buttons. We hear current events that are scary. And we don't realize that there are other ways of understanding the situation that would leave us in a calmer space. And finally, or not finally, wherever we are in this, at this point, let me say, If people recognize that all we have are moments, that's it. And if you make the moment matter, and then the next moment and the next moment, you can get through the day without being a nervous wreck, I believe.
There's a lot to unpack there. I think the biggest thing I want to start with is this idea of mindlessness. I mean, I look at it as lack of self awareness, I guess, in my own.
It's a lack of all awareness.
What are some of the signs that somebody is mindless, and then what can people do to reverse that?
Well, the first thing is that all negative emotions are mindless. As remember, emotions are choices. Emotions depend on how we're understanding the situation. You know, if I meet you at a party and I think you've just snubbed me, that might hurt my feelings, it might anger me, it might do all sorts of things mindlessly. If I said to myself, were you snubbing me or are you just shy? That brings out a very different part of me. All right, so when you see negative emotion, so whenever you're experiencing anything negative, the question is, how else might you understand it? So I was saying before, but there are two ways to become mindful. Top down is really to understand that nobody knows for sure. You can't. Everything is always changing, everything looks different from different perspectives. If you really appreciate that, then you sit up and you notice. You know, if you were going to come visit me today, I don't know how you'd get here in time, but anyways, if you were to visit me, you wouldn't have to practice anything. You'd walk into my house and you'd pay attention. You'd just, you'd say, oh, what is that? Did she do that painting? What books is she reading? That's a cute dog. You would just naturally notice. If you ask people when they walk outside to go to work or just to go to their car, do they actually notice anything? Because even that small space is brand new. All right. So when we think we know, we don't notice. When we know we don't know, we tune in. All right. That's the easiest way. The other is bottom up. Ask yourself, take the things you as they occur to you that you think you know, and ask yourself to find three new things about them. So if you're living with somebody, we've been living together for 15 years, there are no surprises, actually, it's kind of boring. Ask yourself how that person today is different from even the morning, if you're doing this when you first get home from work or school or what have you. And as you notice, several things happen. The first, the simple act of noticing, is energy beginning. It's literally and figuratively enlivening. It's what you're doing when you're having fun, just noticing new things. And the more you notice, the more of these good things you get. But it's also the case, the more you realize you didn't know it before. So if you do this all day long with things, you end up in that other space where you say, Jay, I don't know anything. Now, not knowing is typically stressful for people, but that's because they think they should know. That's because they think other people know and they're going to be seen to be stupid or what have you. Nobody knows, nobody can know. So let me put this in a context. I was at a horse event many years ago. This man asked me, can I watch his horse for him because he's going to get his horse a hot dog? Yeah. What is he? Horses don't eat meat, but I'm nice, try to be, and I say, of course, I watch his horse. He comes back with a hot dog, and the horse ate it. And that's when I realized that everything I thought I knew could be wrong. And for me, it was just in that moment. And then when you think about science, science only gives you probabilities that said if you were to do the same study again, and you can never do it exactly the same, you yourself are different. But if you were to do the same study again, you're likely to get the same findings. Now, if they did a study with horses eating meat, most horses probably wouldn't eat the meat. But it's too hard to describe this amount of meat mixed with this much grain and the horses was this hungry. It's easier just to say horses don't eat meat. And we don't have to feel bad. People now make a personal attribution for uncertainty. I don't know, but it's knowable, so I'm going to feel bad about myself. I'm going to pretend. I'm going to do all sorts of maladaptive things. You have to make a universal attribution, no matter how cocky he seems when he's spouting, his truths. He doesn't know. whoever he is, whoever she is. Nobody knows for sure. So it's a leveler. And when you know you don't know, you ask questions, you pay attention, you look at things differently, and then you're going to notice. And the noticing new things, as I've said, is literally and figuratively enlivening.
We talk a lot about transformation and transcending on the show. Negative thoughts, I talked about at the beginning, is something that people struggle a lot with. Is there a way that people can, is there things they can do every day to help themselves get better at it?
There are several things. One that I've already said is recognize you don't know, so then you sit up and you notice. The other is whenever you're experiencing anything negative, recognize that there's an equally strong but oppositely balanced. So there's another way of looking at it. And the more ways you look at things, the more you become unsure that any particular way is necessarily right, which then leads you to be more mindful. This is probably, I've been doing research for 50 years and many very big findings. But this thought that I had turns out to be more important than anything else to me personally that I've studied, which is the simple notion that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, the person who's doing it, or else they wouldn't do it. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be obnoxious, aggressive, idiotic. So when we see people like this, what are they doing from their? Well, it turns out that every behavior that we're categorizing as negative has an opposite positive alternative. Let me give you an example. So you might not like me because I'm so gullible, and I am. I mark the edge of the gullible continuum. And you can say, Ellen, you've got to change. It's driving me crazy. I say, okay, I'm gonna do everything. I'm gonna try to change. I'll try, but I'm not gonna be successful. Why? Because the reason I'm gullible is from my perspective, I'm trusting. And as long as I'm trusting, there are times I'm going to seem gullible. As long as you value being flexible, at times you're going to be seen as inconsistent. If you value being stable, at times you're going to be seen as boring. If you value being spontaneous, at times you're going to seem impulsive. All right. So we did a little study many, many years ago. We gave people 200 or so behavior descriptions, negative. We said, circle those things you can't stand about yourself that you keep trying to change, but you can't change. So for me, I'd circle gullible, impulsive. The rest don't matter. Then you turn the page over, and in a mixed up order are the positive versions of each of these. Now they're asked, circle those things you really value about yourself. My being spontaneous, my being trusting, which is why at times I seem impulsive and gullible. All right. So now when you're judging yourself and you say to yourself, well, why did I do this? There must be some positive reason. And you find the positive reason, then you go easier on yourself and your spouses and your friends and everybody else in the world. You naturally become less judgmental. Because, let's say you've discovered now that I value being trusting. Do you want me to change? I don't want you to stop being flexible, even though I know at times it's going to feel inconsistent and so on. All right, so it's a relationship enhancer. It's a very simple thought that people's behavior makes sense, or else why would they do it? Now, sometimes our behavior is totally mindless, but when we originally did that behavior, it made some sense. So, yeah, I mean, I was going to give you an example that's maybe too far afield, but it's helpful to people. I do get snow where you're now living,
Yes.
and ice, and yeah, okay. So when I ask people, you're driving along and the car starts to skid, what do you do? So, Doug, what do you do? You're in the car, you're skidding.
I mean, I let off the brakes a little bit and just try to like guide my car straight.
Yeah, okay. That's what people are taught, that you gently pump the brake. However, now that there are anti-lock brakes, that's exactly the opposite of what you should do. Now, if your car starts to skid, you should firmly hit the brake. Okay. Now, it's interesting because when you learned how to drive many years ago, how many years ago did you learn how to drive?
Man, I feel old. 20 years ago.
Okay, okay, you're much younger than I, so don't feel old. All right. So at that time, the way you did, for safety's sake, help yourself in the car that was skidding was to gently pump the brakes. Now that's what you're doing for the next 20 years. You're not paying any attention to brakes because you've learned mindlessly this is what you do when the car skids. But things change. And so now you've got different kinds of brakes. And now the very thing you were doing for safety's sake is likely to cause an accident. And that's the way we live most of our lives. We learn something at one time. We think we've mastered it or know it as well as we care to know it. We keep doing it, keep doing it. Circumstances are changing, but we're oblivious to it. And then we often come up short.
So you've spoken a lot about how our mind impacts our health, and I would love to get into the mind body unity. Is the opposite also true? Like if you're somebody who's obese, somebody who has health issues, is that going to negatively impact your mind as well?
Sure, but of course it depends on why you're obese, and whether you've come to terms with being obese. Not everybody who is, well, it also our definition of obese, but there are some people who are on the thinner side who see themselves as obese. So this is something that has to be from the actor's perspective, not us looking at somebody and saying, gee, they're too large or what have you. If you've come to terms with it, then you're fine and then your thoughts are fine. If you're taking yourself to task for any reason, being too fat, too thin, too short, you're young, you have too many pimples, whatever it is, that yes, should have a negative effect ultimately on your health.
Well, I look at the mind unity connection just in my own words in that, if you feel a certain way about yourself, if you think a certain way, if you're stressed, you're going to make unhealthy choices based on that. So of course it's going to impact the body. Is that really what it is? Is it your perception or is there like a neurological thing that goes on?
No, it's so funny. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked this question because everybody is steeped in mind body dualism. And mind body dualism. So I say this is happening in the level of the mind. And they want, some magic, what's happening with the body. It's all one. So wherever you put the mind, you're necessarily putting the body. We have so many studies. Let me just give you an example of one of them. My graduate student, Peter Ungle, and I just recently published this. We inflict a wound, mild wound, but a wound. People individually are in front of a clock. Unbeknownst to them, the clock is rigged. So for a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, the clock is going half as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it's real time. The wound heals based on clock time. Yes, your perceptions determine almost your whole life.
That's wild. I mean, it's so crazy because you hear it so much, and people think like, oh, like it's just like this woo woo stuff, but it's so true.
Yeah, well, but it's interesting because so many people have had the experience of you're walking down the street in the winter or the fall and a leaf blows in your face and all of a sudden you're startled. Your blood pressure, heart rate all increase until you say, oh, it's just a leaf. Or you see somebody regurgitating and you yourself come very close to vomiting. We've all had experiences where we know about our thoughts influencing our bodies. So my first experience was many, many years ago. And I think it laid the groundwork for my creating the mind body unity idea. So, as I said, I was married when I was obscenely young. We go to Paris on our honeymoon, and we're in this restaurant, and I order a mixed grill. One of the foods on the mixed grill was pancreas. Now, Doug, I still to this day, no matter how many times I don't understand why I thought because I was married meant that I had to eat the pancreas. But, I was trying to be all grown up. Okay, so the food comes to the table. I ask my then husband, which of these things is the pancreas? That. Okay. I eat everything else. Now the moment of truth. Can I eat the pancreas? I start eating it and I literally become sick. He starts to laugh. I said, why are you laughing? He said, because that's chicken. You ate the pancreas a while ago. Okay. My beliefs determine my illness.
This episode is brought to you by Timeline Nutrition. Listen, my main goals for the remainder of the year revolve around health and vitality. After hearing about Timeline Nutrition from several of my friends in the health industry, I decided to give their flagship product, MitoPure, a try. MitoPure contains urolithin A, which is a powerful postbiotic that can be challenging to get from your diet. As you know, science has been a big focus on the podcast, so I was really impressed that Timeline has done 10 years of research to bring this product to market. I've been taking their berry powder for over a month now and have already noticed a bit of a difference in the gym. Some of the long term benefits I'm hoping to achieve from taking it include improved energy, muscle strength, and endurance, which are right in line with my goals. So I highly recommend you check out Timeline Nutrition, and they are now offering 10% off your first order of MitoPure. So just go to timeline.com/Doug to get 10% off your first order of MitoPure. That's TIMELINE.com/Doug. Now back to the show. And I think there's obviously, I mean, I know you've been a pioneer in the research around mind, body, and our thoughts and mindfulness and stuff. I think people know that it's important for them to pay attention to the way that they talk to themselves and that it will dictate things like longevity, their mental health, their overall well being, but yet they have a hard time.
If you spend a lifetime pumping your brakes gently to avoid an accident, it's not going to, my guess is next time you're in the car and the car starts to skid on ice, you'll also start to gently pump the brakes. You've been doing it, doing it, doing it, and doing it, that, it seems the natural thing to do. But there's nothing natural about it. We've learned and we have to unlearn. And I think it's a wonderful thing to know you don't know. People, ask me when I'm giving some very important lecture, are you scared? You Why? Why should I be scared? I have no problem saying I don't know. I know that there are things I do know. I know there are things I can do. And as long as I'm aware of that, then the things that I can't do and I don't know don't frighten me. It's very easy to say I don't know. And when you can get to that point where you don't have to prove anything to anybody, life becomes easier. It's more exciting when you really practice saying to yourself, how are these things that seem bad? A fire. How could that fire be bad, be good? And, the things I lost, I don't remember except for those notes. And yet every single Christmas, I have a renewed faith in people because that experience was so meaningful to me. So that if you can take things that seem bad, just ask yourself, what are the advantages? And things in the past that you thought were awful, and what are the advantages? Then you have, if something happens, well, I'll be able to deal with it. There's going to be an upside. And I don't have to be the way many people are now, where if it's good, I have to kill myself to get it. If it's bad, I have to run like hell away from it. I can just be still, and whatever happens, happens. It's a very different way of living, if again, so you and I have this magical, new relationship. You can decide where we're going to go to dinner. You can decide what movie we're going to watch. You can make all of it because I don't care. I'm going to enjoy myself no matter what. Because this simple act of noticing leads us to enjoying things. So we had women watching football games, women who hated football, and they either just watched it or they were told, notice one new thing, notice three new things, notice six new things. And the more they noticed, the more they liked it. It's not that hard to be at peace with yourself. All you need to do is recognize that those things that you bought into need to be re examined from a different perspective.
One of the things that people have asked me about my own story is how I changed the way I talk to myself. I used to really talk poorly to myself. I can only give an answer based on my own experience, which could be totally anecdotal or placebo or whatever you would call it. Is there anything that you found in your research that people can do like on a daily basis, whether it is like journaling or whether it's like saying certain affirmations that can help change the way they speak to themselves?
Well, I think that as soon as, that when people speak badly to themselves, the first thing they should say is, well, why did I do this thing? There must be some good reason I did it. We'll go back to our relationship, Doug, this fictional relationship. I don't want you to ever forgive me. I don't want to ever be forgiven. I want to be understood. I'm a nice person, you're a nice person. If I did something that had some seemingly negative consequence, why would you assume that I intended it? How else might you understand it? And so I guess what I'm saying is outcomes, we need to understand outcomes are in our heads. Now, that's not what we're taught in the world at large. You're taught here are good things, here are bad things. That fire was a wonderful thing for me. I think that once people recognize that what they're feeling is a function of what they're telling themselves, and then say to themselves, what else might I tell myself? How might somebody else look at this? Why did I do this thing? What was my intention? Why did he or she say that terrible thing to me? An example, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but let me just say, we did some work on bullying. Bullying is interesting to me because I think parents natural, this is going to be bullying in adults, but till I get there. Parents, I think, tell their kids not to bully because it's not nice to pick on somebody weaker than you are, which I think in and of itself would increase bullying because that means I'm stronger than you are. Okay, if we taught kids that only the weak bully, there'd be nothing in it for the bully to bully. So now you're an adult, you are just belittled by your boss, and you feel stressed, you feel small, you feel angry, you feel all these negative things. If you recognize that nobody who has it together, nobody who is confident, happy, together, whatever we mean by that, behaves that way, then your feeling belittled should lead you to feel sorry for that person. And then the whole game changes. So when you're mistreated, rather than feel less than, to realize the person who's mistreating you is having some problem, I think helps quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think what I was trying to get at is like, people who are like, I am a failure, I am a loser. And then what happens, I think, is the reality may reflect that. Like maybe they don't have any money, maybe they don't have any relationships. Like how can people fix that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because one of my goals is to take the vertical where we sit up near the top and make it horizontal. And so I'm fond of saying that I don't believe anybody is better than I am, but I also don't believe I'm better than anybody else. This kind of comparing all the time, I think, leads to a lot of heartache. And so I wrote a little song for my grandkids that, is important for all of us as adults. I won't sing it, just say very simple. Everybody doesn't know something, everybody knows something else. Everybody can't do something, everyone can do something else. And when you recognize the things that you can do, the things that you do well, the things about yourself that you're proud of, it's easier to see things that you don't do well. And we don't want to be perfect in everything. This is a mistake that people make. You know, you can either do things perfectly mindlessly or imperfectly mindfully. So if you were a golfer and every time you swung that golf club, you got a hole in one, there'd be no game there. Even though we often seek perfection, it's not ultimately what we want in our lives. So the larger point is that it's easy to see that you can't do something when you recognize all the things that you can do. And the world doesn't help us with this. This we really have to do for ourselves because from school on, people are evaluating us. And so if you're an A student, okay, that's fine. But if you're a B, why aren't you an A, a C, and so on. And so people take this in and wear it as if they have to be what the world has told them they are. It's sad to me. What I'm saying, in some ways, is profound, and in other ways, it might sound so silly, but, everybody is worthwhile. Everybody can do something well. Who decided how we should be? So another name that I was going to give the mindful body in the writing of it was Who Says So? And in some ways, I think we would prosper by becoming our 2, 3-year-old selves. Who says so? Because everything that is was a decision, not handed down from the heavens. The notion of excellence, the notion of what you should do, how you should do it, and so on. And that when we say, who decided that? So, for example, people might not know that many of the Impressionist paintings, Impressionism itself, that people pay millions of dollars for, was in fact rejected in its day. Who decides? Who decides what a good singing voice is? Who decides the way we're supposed to play tennis? So for me, I have a strike, hit the ball, kill it. I'm playing doubles, doesn't go in, so now I have a wuss, a very weak second serve. I think we should have three serves. First one, I kill. Second one, I get to kill it, so I learn something from the first one, and I still have the backup third serve. The point is, the way things are was just somebody's decision about how they should be. The more you differ from the person who wrote the rule, the more important it is for you to write your own rule. I don't know if what I'm saying is clear to you. If we were together and I have a large group of people, I'd make an announcement. Is there anybody 6'5" in the audience? And for reasons I don't understand, there always is. So I'd have this guy come up, stand next to me. I'm 5'3", he's 6'5". We look ridiculous together. I'd ask him to put his hand up. His hand is 3 inches larger than mine. Then I just raise the question, should we do anything physical the same way? And my answer is no. And if he wrote the rule and I'm trying to do it the way he and these other tall men decided it should be done, I'm never going to be very good at it. All right. So see, everything is mutable. Everything that is can be different. And so once we learn that, we then change things so it fits us better.
Because there's a lot of talk right now about aging. Even people in their 20s, 30s, 40s are incredibly kind of passionate about aging, looking younger. There's talks of people who wanting to live past 100 years old. I know you talk about like thoughts and perception of aging. Like what is your stance on all this?
Well, my stance is, if they're enjoying the things that they're doing to make themselves live longer, fine. But many people aren't. And that rather than worry about adding more years to your life, I think we should be adding more life to our years. And by being more mindful, and our research suggests, then you will live longer. But I think that, even where do we get the view that somebody who has wrinkles, that that's unappealing? We should call wrinkles marks of distinction. Wow, look at all that experience in that person. That's the one I'm going to go to for advice. So every thought we have, every social comparison we make, every evaluation was given to us by people in the past that we just mindlessly carry forward. And, so we have whole groups of people, you go back in time and there were people who were disparaged. And then they saying, remember, when people was in the 60s are speaking of black is beautiful. Of course, black is beautiful. Every color is potentially beautiful. So old, it means decrepit. No, old means wise. There's something else that happens. So I don't know how frequent this is. You can weigh in on it. But there are things that older people do that look foolish to younger people, but they're doing it for a whole different reason. So let's say when you're young, you're uninhibited, right? Then you learn the social conventions and how to behave. Then hopefully at some point you say, this is ridiculous. And then you become disinhibited. Disinhibited is very different from, the rules and you say, screw the rules. I just don't care. The rules didn't make sense or don't pertain right now. So some of these things are very freeing. When I was young, a young up and coming, and let's say I spilled something on my shirt, like an idiot, I'd walk around like this and no one would see. You know, who cares? And I do this exercise with my students. I'm in this large lecture class on health. I tell them, you can't come to class next week unless you're wearing two different shoes. Some don't come to class. Most of them do. The ones that are not very bold wear two black shoes where you can hardly tell that they're different. But then you have some that are wearing a red and a white sneaker, and the first thing we discuss is, did anybody notice? And oddly, nobody even notices. And if they notice, what are they going to think? If they know you, they know that you don't typically wear two different shoes. They're not going to change their view of you. If they don't know you, why do you care what they think? So, this one girl, wonderful young woman, comes to the seminar and says, Professor Langer, you won't believe what happened. I said, what? So I'm in the elevator. She's in her two different shoes. And this guy looks at my feet, looks at my face, looks at my feet, points to my feet and says, was that intentional? You know what I did? I said, no. What did you do? I looked at his feet. I looked at his face. I looked at his feet. I pointed to his feet. Was that intentional? She asked. All right. So instead of being uncomfortable, she took the person who, not that I'm suggesting we should do this, but it was making her uncomfortable and turned the tables. When we recognize that everything we're supposed to do was just somebody's decision, it gives us much more latitude, to make things work for ourselves. So the older you get, I realize now that I haven't been on target answering your question, but the older you get, the more of this, we'll say, this kind of wisdom occurs to us. Where when you're 2 years old and you scrape your knee, you cry bloody murder. When you're 7 years old and Johnny or Janie doesn't send you a Valentine, you crush and you think you're going to be alone for the rest of your life. When you're 15 and you have some pimples, oh my God, you're going to be ugly for the rest of and it just goes on. At some point, and there's no reason for people to wait. But at some point, you realize none of it matters. It just doesn't matter. And you can make that happen sooner rather than later by simply asking yourself, who said so? How might this be a positive thing? And with respect to stress, ask yourself, is this thing even likely to happen? And then slowly we become more comfortable with ourselves.
I know your work has been something that might go against a lot of traditional, science.
No.
What have been some of your biggest like criticisms over the years?
Well, it's interesting. The way I stay a happy camper, Doug, is that I don't tune into all those. I don't know. People don't come up to me in the street and say, you were wrong.
But if you were to look at it objectively, what would you say people eat?
No, I'm not looking at it objectively. The work has had, I think, a reasonably major influence. I know that when I would give talks to the medical world, there would be some people who, because they think, your thoughts have nothing to do with anything. And that would be sort of criticism you're thinking of. I had given a talk not that long ago to 5,000, I thought, were 5,000 women with breast cancer, and found out afterwards that a third of the audience were physicians. Because, I wasn't aware that I sound anti-medical. And I think, doctors are wonderful. Their job is excruciatingly hard. They're very smart people, but they don't know because you can't know. And one's thoughts matter. Anyway, it turns out that rather than critical, they were extremely supportive of all that I was saying because they know they don't know. And imagine how hard it is when everybody expects you to know. I had won this Genius Award a while ago. And after that, I can't tell you how many of my friends, every time didn't know an answer to something or said something stupid, they'd say, and you're supposed to be a genius. I didn't say. But that's the way the doctors are often trained to be, to act as if they know more than they know that they know. So it's very freeing to be able, and it goes back. I know, and it's going to sound silly to some people, but if you know the things you know and you feel comfortable with things you can do, the rest of it matters less. So what I say when I'm giving lectures to the kinds of people who want to be critical, as you're suggesting, I try to make clear that I'm sharing, I'm not selling. Here are where my thoughts and my research have led me. If it's useful to you, wonderful. I'm not running for public office. I'm not trying to get anybody's vote.
You're filled with one-liners, right? We've spent a lot of this conversation talking about a variety of things, but mainly it's like how our mind, mental health, thoughts contributes to our overall body and well-being. If we were to close this conversation with a one-liner about what you want people to take away from our conversation, what would it be?
Accept the power of uncertainty or exploit the power of uncertainty.
How can people do that?
Well, first they have to acknowledge that they don't know. And it's easier to do that when you realize nobody can know because the data are only probabilities. And then if you know you don't know, you tune in and you tune in and everything is exciting and you notice new things and the neurons are firing and life becomes more fun.
Well, Dr. Langer, this has been awesome. I encourage people to check out your latest book, The Mindful Body, wherever you get your books. Anything else you'd like to share regarding the conversation?
Well, there's so much. I'm going to give you another one liner, but they'll have to read the book to understand it fully. All right. Rather than waste your time trying to make the right decision, instead make the decision right.
Love it.
And that's because these, decisions that people suffer with lead them to be stressed, and that stress leads to all of the things we've already talked about.
Well, thank you so much once again for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.